Hey, what's up? How's it? Aloha, welcome to Culturized. It is me, Makani. This is the space where we get to share, learn, and talk culture, whether it's ethnic, whether it's native, whether it's social. This is the place to do it. If you ever wanted to dive into culture and you're just kind of unsure, you don't know where to go, this is the place to do it. But because we are a culturized and a cultured show, we always have to make sure we start things properly. Kumai kia nue nue piawi telewa kauna manui tahiti ikane akekehi makuai alohai aloha kakohue alohai. All right, space is ready to go. Maybe I should do it the other way. There you go. All right, that's how we got to start things off, my friends. I'm humbled. I'm privileged to have sitting with me, of course, via Zoom, though, and sometimes we just have to do it that way. But sitting in front of me is probably, I like to call him a walking encyclopedia of Filipino knowledge and specifically the art of tattooing, Lane Wilcken. Brother, how are you?
Aloha, Makani. I'm doing good.
First of all, mahalo, because I know you guys have been busy, of course, in this time. Have you guys been still doing work in this last few years?
Yeah, during the pandemic, we've still been working, but at a limited capacity,
Yeah.
just trying to keep people safe. But
I hear that.
we're still working.
Cool. I want to get right into this conversation I like to have, especially here. What in your manao, in your thought, what is culture to you?
Culture is just it's a lens through which we view life, and that lens is given to us by our ancestors. It's a way of being and understanding the way that we interact with the world and each other.
I like that. I like it. How important, how important is it? Because I sometimes I get this feeling that, a lot of us, we forget our culture, or not forget it. We realize that we have a culture, but we don't pride. How important is culture in daily life?
For me, personally, that's an everyday thing and every moment thing. It really defines who we are. And a lot of people, they kind of get lost when they're separated from their culture. They fall into hollow pursuits in life. And really, this is what gives us a true identity, is not just us singularly, but the total of who came before you and who you're living with now. That really gives you a strong sense of identity. Yeah.
I love that. And it's we always have to go back to culture. And then, of course, here in Hawaii, as you know, whenever we get together or we meet new people, it's always like, hey, what high school you went to? Where did you grow up and what high school did you go to?
Yeah.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in the States mostly.
Okay.
On the continent. Spent a couple years in Hawaii when I was 19, and but mostly Southern California.
Nice.
Yeah.
So growing up in Southern California, what was it like? What ethnicities make up Lane Wilcken?
Well, a little bit about my background is my dad is Haole. He's white. He's Scandinavian and English descent.
Nice, Viking.
Yeah, and that's the weird.
Right.
But my mom, she is primarily Ilocano from the Philippines, although in our ancestry we have ties to the Cordillera, which is the mountainous region of Luzon, also to some of the lowland areas down south. I have 6 different ethnicities from the Philippines.
Wow. I like that. And I want to get into that a little bit more because a lot of people do not realize that there's so many different ethnicities within the Filipino culture. However, I want to stay on the topic of, growing up and being raised in California and the household. What was more dominant, or was it equal to have Scandinavian or Filipino culture? Which one was more dominant, I should say? Because we know sometimes when we have a Filipino mom, whoa.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So there's some things you can't escape from, right? So it's gonna happen. It's gonna happen. But living in Southern California, in place I grew up was Thousand Oaks,
Wow. Okay.
which is a little bit of a bougie area, and at the time it was predominantly white.
Wow. Do me a favor, hold that thought, because I want to really dive into that and what parts of ethnicity you were brought up in the household. If you're joining us on YouTube, don't forget to hit the notification button, subscribe. This is Culturized. Bringing you what matters. Viewers can receive the Star Advertiser digital full access subscription for just $9.95 per month. Go to staradvertiser.com and click on subscribe. Use the code AHITHING. Bank of Hawaii. Welcome to tomorrow. Member FDIC. Hey, thanks a lot for joining us. This is Culturized. Don't forget, hit the notification button, subscribe if you're watching us on KKAI. Thanks a lot for doing that. We are sitting with Elaine Wilcken. We're talking culture, the culture of Filipino, the culture of specifically tattooing. We're going to get into that, but I'm always lucky and privileged to just know how and who these people are. And so we're talking about you growing up in Southern California, specifically Thousand Oaks, and there was like six that you can read, six other Filipinos in your I think that's amazing, actually. What was that like?
It's very othering, for lack of a better way of describing it. And being mestizo or hapa is really interesting because you're trying to straddle two different cultures. But then when you're in that much of a minority, everyone looks to you as the flagship of that culture.
Right.
And tremendous responsibility. And so you end up having to be the model minority, so to speak, because everyone's looking at you. And then they're going to base their belief systems about that ethnic group based on your behavior. So if you don't behave, or if you don't act, in a way that in Hawaiian you would say pono, or in Ilocano we say pudno.
I like that.
Then you're going to get in trouble, right? You're going to kind of dishonor the entire ethnic group.
It's funny how we become the authority figure, and the lens on us is a lot bigger. While you were growing up there, did they have a hard time I'm thinking at the time, did they have a hard time figuring out what you were? A lot of times I go to California and they speak to me in Spanish. So yes. I'll answer them in Hawaiian. And they're like, oh, what part of Mexico are you from? But was it like that for you? Like they couldn't figure out what you were?
Oh, definitely. And that still happens today.
Of course, right?
I'm racially ambiguous or ethnically ambiguous. And so it just depends what the dominant brown ethnic group is in the area, then they're going to associate me with that.
Now, growing up in the household, what kinds of things do you remember that were very, very Filipino? My household, I was kind of evenly spaced out with Filipino and Hawaiian, but do you remember things specifically?
Oh, yeah. I was fortunate enough to have my grandparents living with us. And my grandmother, she was what we call a mang-ilot, or a midwife.
Yeah.
As well as mang-anito, a communicator with the ancestors. She was an herbalist. She was a medicine woman, for lack of a better term. And watching her do her things was very interesting. Watching the way she cared for her hair. She used to have long, long hair, and she'd brush it out, and then she'd save all the hair. And even fingernail clippings, things like that, she'd save those. And her explanation to me of what she would do with it is, I'm going to burn and bury that later. Wow. And when I ask why, it's so that the malevolent ones can't get a hold of it and use it to harm me. And come to find out that that's a tradition that's also found with Hawaiians, also found with Native people here. And that kind of thing was those were the kind of things that I observed growing up.
It's funny, you just answered my next conversation, because I always ask the question about, did you, first of all, lucky and blessed to grow up with grandparents, right? Because that's that wealth of knowledge. But were they, I always say, were they blatant about like how this is what we do and this is how we do cultures, or like you just said, was it more of a kilo, more observation, or was it both?
Well, it was more observation on the whole, because one of the problems that we have as Filipinos when we immigrate is that we are taught to be the model minority. We're taught to assimilate, and assimilation means letting go of whatever culture you came from and moving into the dominant culture and practicing their ways. And so for a lot of Filipinos, and this isn't just common to this is a common experience, is that they don't want to teach language, for example. They don't want to teach these different traditions. They want us to assimilate. My mom wanted me to assimilate, especially being half white. Of course, they want us to assimilate, and that's always difficult because you never quite look white. Right. And you're never going to be fully accepted by them.
Hold that thought. We're going to take a quick break. We are diving into the culture of Filipinos and everything about it with Lane Wilcken right here on Culturized. This show is sponsored by Hawaiian Telcom, Hawaii's technology leader. For all your money needs, Hawaiian Financial Federal Credit Union is here for you. Visit hificu.com. That's hi-fi, letter C, letter U.com. Hey, thanks a lot for joining us. This is Culturized. I am so humbled and privileged because, part of me is Filipino, and I always make sure that I am going to be a lifetime student because I always know that you have to continue to learn about who you are, and I always try and surround myself with people with knowledge of that. So Lane Wilcken is with me, and he's sharing with me. We're going to get into the topic of Filipino tattooing, but right now I'm so intrigued of just how Filipinos, we're very adaptive people, right? So we were talking about how we needed to assimilate. My grandparents were, they did a little bit of that, but I always like the fact that they also didn't, right? So when you observed your grandmother doing things, and even in Southern California, did she still practice, plant medicine and conversing with uhane while she was in California, or did that just kind of go away?
That was mostly private. If she did it at all. It's not ever explicitly taught. Yeah. For a lot of us, right, who have grandparents or family that do these traditional practices, it's usually not taught, especially in the diaspora. And so if they do practice, it's usually in quiet, not necessarily in secret, but in quiet. Right. And some of my siblings, they've gravitated towards that, and some have not. Wow. But from what I've observed, that's usually the method of teaching anyway, is that it's done through observation. You just kind of shadow your grandparents and watch what they do, and you learn that way. And that's how it's done in indigenous societies.
I always say that silence is probably sometimes the best teacher, right? Now, speaking of which, so yeah, brothers and sisters, for you specifically, what part of Filipino culture did you pili to? What intrigued you first? What did you connect to within the Filipino culture, practice wise? Was it tattooing, or no, was it?
Originally, it was oral tradition.
Nice, because now you've written some books.
Yes.
I love that. So oral traditions, things like traditional stories or language? Yeah,
or what we would call, what we may condescendingly refer to as mythology.
I like how you said that.
But that's what really drew my interest first, and that helped provide a lens to the ancient ones, because for us, from the Philippines, it's been 500 years this year that Magellan landed on our shores. And so the devastation to our indigenous cultures and practices is extensive. We've lost a lot. And so a lot of Filipinos throughout the world today still don't know that we had a traditional tattooing practice, for example. That's been very largely erased. And when the Spaniards first came to our islands, they referred to it as Las Islas de los Pintados, which in Spanish means the islands of the painted people, because everybody was tattooed.
Wow.
But it's been erased so much that most lowland Filipinos that are more westernized don't even know. They have no idea. Funny story, when before Corona and all that stuff happened, I would tattoo at the Tattoo Expo there, the Hawaii Tattoo Expo that we've been going to at Blaisdell for the last. It's been like half a decade or something.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's funny because I'll sit there and, you know, I'm racially ambiguous. People don't necessarily know what I am. A lot of times if I'm in Hawaii, again, the dominant culture, I get kind of assumed, oh, he might be Hawaiian or something. So I'm there at the Tattoo Expo. I'm tattooing. I got the Filipino flag in the back, you know, got my books out front. And, you know, we're just doing the work and the Filipinos will come by and they'll see the flag. Now, this guy got the Filipino flag up. They'll look at me tapping. They'll look at the flag. They'll look back at me tapping. And then finally they'll notice the book, Filipino Tattoos Ancient. And then you'll see the light bulb go off. Like, oh man, we have a practice? What?
Right.
And then they're on their phone, they're calling their friends, hey, gotta get over here, we get Filipino tattooing. And they just lose their minds.
I want to get into that right now. I want to get into Filipino tattooing, and that's what we're here for. If you're joining us on Culture of Filipino Tattoos.
Culturize, brought to you by Beachside Roofing, the leaders. Poncho Solar is specialized in providing energy solutions throughout Hawaii since 1987. Call us at 808-773-7384.
Hey, thanks a lot for joining us. Welcome back to Culturize. We are talking, I love this. If you just joined us, we're talking the culture of Filipino tattoos. And we're talking like traditional. Okay, so just keep that in mind. And one of the authority figures in traditional tattooing, and we talked about how Filipinos, when they realize it, because like we talked, you've been to expos all over, right? And especially in Hawaii for decades. And what that initial, when other Filipinos look at your book and then they look at you and then the correlation happens, right? What is one of the first things they ask you?
They ask, well, one of the first things they ask is, what is that? You know,
Are you
what is that?
That's
what
funny.
do you call that? What are the designs? You know, it just vomits out of their mouth. They're so excited to know about the practice, especially in Hawaii where tattooing is generally more accepted, you know, and then there is that little bit of a cultural lens via the Hawaiians that they can understand things through. And it's always nice to work with Filipinos that have grown up in Hawaii because they're a little bit cognizant of what traditional tattooing is all about, whereas those of us that are in the diaspora in the continent, they don't have any kind of frame of reference. So often I have to end up referencing Moana. You know, do you remember that one part when they were tattooing that guy? And he's like, ooh, and he's only tattooing that one little ikan, that one little fish. And they're like, yeah, that's what we had before. But then things happen like, oh, you're just appropriating from the Samoans, you're appropriating from Hawaiians. And I have to tell them, no, this is something that goes back literally thousands of years. Some of the oldest artifacts that we have found, tattooing artifacts that we've found in the Philippines have been carbon dated at close to 4,000 years.
Wow.
So the practice is at least that old, if not older. So, you know, the reality is that this is something that has existed for thousands of years, but 500 years ago, it went into decline. And then about 300 years ago, it was practically exterminated in most regions of the Philippines.
Was there, you mentioned the Spanish, how they identified us. Is there a proper word for Filipino tattooing?
Well, it varies ethnic group to ethnic group, but there is a term that I use that is kind of a generalized term that we have in Luzon and the Visayas, which are the central islands of the Philippines. And that term is batok.
Okay.
Sometimes it's spelled differently. Sometimes it's pronounced a little bit differently, like huatok or fatok or batok. But the term batok means to dive. And so in one of my ethnic groups that I come from, the Itnug people of Abra, there's a ceremony where a young man will go and he'll dive into the river and catch a fish with his hands. And then he rises up out of the water and holds the fish up over his head. And he says, I am the mama batok. I am the diver. So you have to understand the symbolism there. And those of you that are familiar with Hawaiian culture will probably understand this a little bit faster. But the water is associated with the underworld in our tradition. And so this is someone who is diving into the underworld and bringing back nourishment for the community. And that's what we do as tattoo practitioners, is we dive into the underworld and we reveal the nourishment that comes from there.
I just had chicken skin. That's amazing.
Now there is another term for it in Tagalog, which is one of my other ethnic groups that I belong to. In Tagalog, the word for tattoo is tatak.
Oh, okay.
T-A-T-A-K.
Very similar.
Which is very similar to tatau. And so that would be the closer cognate between our languages. And then in the South, they refer to it as the pangatub sagimakud, which literally translates out to as the illumination of the soul.
So I want to throw something out. Quoting you, cultural tattooing is a ritual. Decolonize tattooing and restore its honor. I want you to explain that when we come up. So if you're joining us, cultural tattooing as a ritual, decolonizing tattooing and restoring its honor. If you want to find out about that, our extended version on YouTube right now. Thanks a lot for joining us on Culturized. Hey, thanks a lot for joining us on Culturized. If you are on YouTube, welcome to the extended version. This is where we get, like Elaine talked about, we're going to even dive deeper into the water, and we're going to bring all this out. We are talking about the culture of Filipino tattooing, just the rituals and the things that go in it. And we're talking to one of my favorite authority figures on that, author, father, Filipino. All these titles that you have is amazing to me, and we want to get into that. So I read somewhere, cultural tattooing is a ritual. Decolonize tattooing and restore its honor. I love that. Explain that to our friends.
Well, here's the thing, is that modern tattooing, Western tattooing, that we have nowadays, when you go into a tattoo shop, where did that ultimately come from? Ultimately, it came from the Pacific. One of the first people that Europeans brought back to Europe was found in the Philippines. They took this man named Giolo back to England. Unfortunately, he died shortly thereafter from the European diseases, smallpox, if I remember right. But what Westerners did is they came to our islands, they took our practice, they stripped it of all spirituality, stripped it of all cultural context, and all that you have left behind is the art. So people that grow up thinking about tattoo shops, what's most important? The art, because that's really all it's been reduced down to. But tattooing in indigenous cultures throughout the world, doesn't matter if you come from a European background, Asian, Pacific Islander, South American, Native American, those practices are always ritualistic. And that's why I say, decolonize tattoos. Restore them to their former honor so that you have a fuller understanding of what this is really all about.
I like that, because like you said, today there's a lot of people that they just want the facade. They want the facade of that. And I think what you're doing is brilliant, because now it gives the story to that marking, right? And speaking of markings, so Kili and I, Mako, we always have these conversations about markings. Is it similar to where, what would be the protocol before somebody actually is lying in front of you at your knee, before you actually put the mark on them? What goes into that up until that point? Now, do they just see you and say, hey, I have a design in mind? Or is it, no, you are the kahu, you're the master. You say, this is what you're going to get. What's that process like?
Well, our process for my school is a little bit different. We've adapted the practice for the diaspora because a lot of times they don't have cultural context for this. They're raised and their first experience is Western tattooing, not necessarily cultural tattooing. Again, we have we have at least a couple centuries of disconnect from this. And so when they come to me, I choose the designs. And the way I explain it is, you don't go into a doctor and say, hey, doc, I got brain cancer. Sign me up for chemo and radiation therapy. You're not the expert. You don't know you don't even know if you actually have brain cancer. You might just have a bad migraine, right? And so it's leaning on the experience and the knowledge that the practitioner has to determine what designs are appropriate for you. And of course, these are ethnic specific designs. Just because you're from the Philippines doesn't mean you can have a Kalinga design, for example, or a Bontok design, or a Visayan design. I've had people come up to me and say, hey, I really like this design and I want it here on my body. And I have to tell them, I don't do that. But again, we have to have some compassion because people are coming from a Western understanding of tattooing, not necessarily an indigenous one.
So it's almost, I like that because you're actually having to encourage that person. The last thing that you're going to get is the actual marking, but up until that point, do you require them to do some research on their own family?
Most of the time, that's 99% of the time, that is a prerequisite, is that they need to know where their ancestors came from in the Philippines, what languages they spoke. Often in the Philippines, especially in the more modern era, we have a lot of intermixing. And especially here on the continent, we have a lot of mixing between ethnic groups. And so it's really important for us to have them to do their genealogy, because even though, for example, you and I were speaking English right now, does that make us necessarily British? No, it doesn't. We may not necessarily be ethnically British or Anglo-Saxon. We just speak this language. And so same kind of thing happens in the Philippines. People will immigrate to Manila, for example, and they'll learn Tagalog, and they might be there a couple of generations, and the descendant might think they're Tagalog, but if they do their ancestry, they find, oh, we come from Pangasinan, or we come from this other island. That's why it's so important, because ultimately I'm responsible to that person's ancestors. And I do not want to cross over on the other side and have some angry ancestor. Why'd you put that on my descendant? You know,
because I always say that. I said, I don't need any of your ancestors to visit me. Now, have you ever come across Filipinos that were just blown away? Because every once in a while you run into somebody who thinks they know, and then you give them the opportunity to really dive in. Have some just minds blown, like I had no idea? And is it a good thing today for people to figure out who their ethnic culture is?
Oh, definitely. And I had a session where a young man came through. He thought he was Tagalog. And I said, let me look at your genealogy real quick. And I started looking at the names, and I'm like, that's not a Tagalog name. And come to find out, his family, similar situation as I explained before, had immigrated into a Tagalog-speaking region, and then they immigrate to the United States, and then there's that other disconnect by, immigrating to the States. And so we just sat down, we looked at his genealogy, come to find out, no, he's from Pangasinan. No, he's also this ethnic group. He wasn't even Tagalog, period. Wow. And he was asking, oh, can I have this one? I want pala on me, which is a type of star. on me because I'm Tagalog and I know the story about Tala, and I'm like, bro, you're not even Tagalog. You shouldn't even have that mark.
Wow.
So it's really important that people know where they come from, because ultimately it's the ancestors that bestow those blessings in the designs. I just facilitate. Of course, I'm giving my mana to the design. My apprentices that are stretching, they're giving their mana to the design. But the ultimate mana, so to speak, comes from them, not from us.
So it always blows me when you're just talking about how, he migrated to different places. But, it's funny because, modern day Filipinos, we just think, oh, Philippines. But within the Philippines, how many main ethnicities are there?
There's, well, to give you context, there's over 100 distinct languages. And with those languages are distinct cultures. And then there are dialects of those cultures. In the Philippines, there was a big push to make Tagalog the national language.
Right, I remember that.
Decades ago. And so people began referring to other languages in the Philippines as dialects, but they're not really dialects, they're separate languages. For example, Tagalog and Ilocano, and I know in Hawaii, you folks have a lot of Ilocanos over there.
Yeah.
Ilocano and Tagalog are not mutually intelligible. They have words that are similar that I can kind of pick my way through Tagalog and understand some of the words, but I can't understand things on a whole. It would be kind of the same thing if we'll take Hawaiian or Samoan, for example, right? Samoan and Filipino. The word for sky in most Philippine languages is langit. If you drop the T off of that, langi, that's Samoan, right? Hawaiian, lani.
Wow.
But it's close, but can I fully understand Samoan? No.
Right.
There's a lot of words that we have in common, but the way those languages are structured, the euphemisms and the metaphoric aspects of language, it's different.
Now that puts a whole new perspective, because I think about it. It's like we're. It's almost as though Filipinos we're like the experts in immigration. I mean, we go from our ancestors are from. Maybe you go to Manila and then you like that your client he thinks he's Tagalog, and then he's like, no, you're from somewhere else. And then you come to the mainland, and from the mainland then you go to Hawaii. Then it's so many. But I think which is a plus. Back to the tattooing when they want it. How important is the placement of the mark?
The placement is very important, because it's the placement, the orientation of the design that often determines what ethnic group it belongs to. There are shared elements throughout the Philippines, even with the greater Pacific, we're all experts at making triangles, for example.
Right?
But how big is that triangle? Where is it on the body? How is it oriented or laid out on the body? That's really important, because that also determines ethnic group. But on top of that, one of the things that I discovered a number of years ago with my apprentices is that a lot of the traditional placements seem to coincide very closely with Chinese medicine's understanding of meridian lines and acupuncture points. And I even see that with Hawaiian tattooing. And for those of you who may not know, I trained with Suakione Nunez, and I'm one of his international students. And even with, like, for example, the alamai that goes up the inner leg of the mostly women have that. But the alamai follows a fertility meridian line, according to Chinese medicine. So if you're not familiar with acupuncture, a real basic understanding is if what the acupuncturist is doing, he stimulates a particular point on the body to facilitate adding energy or releasing energy from an organ system. And so that alamai up the inner thigh and calf follows that fertility line. And so it's too close to be coincidence. Yeah. And we have similar placements in the Philippines too that follow these meridian lines, especially the placements that we find in the Western Visayas. Their bodysuit that they used to have hits all those major meridian lines and acupuncture points. And so we're doing something beyond the aesthetic, beyond the symbolism. We're also doing something that is an enhancement to a person's health. So placement is extremely important.
Blew my mind. So we're essentially, part of tattooing is physical, mental, and spiritual healing, health, and wellness.
Exactly.
Totally blows my mind. Now, if you're joining us, this is Culturized. Don't forget to hit the notification button, subscribe. If you have any questions, comment down below. You're located where right now? Where are you in the world today?
I'm on the 9th island, brother.
Nice.
Las Vegas, Nevada.
I love that. I love it. Of course, we had a rough last 2 years. When was the last time you were in Hawaii?
It's been about a year and a half ago now.
Wow.
We just locked down over here, just working on my home studio for now. Used to travel quite a bit, but not anymore.
Yeah, I know we're looking forward for you to coming back to Hawaii. Any plans soon?
Not in 2021. I'm hoping that if things get a little better, pandemic-wise, I'm hoping to return in 2022.
I can't wait so we can sit down. I want to pick your brain a lot more. Now, if somebody wanted to, even outside of tattooing, if there's Filipinos that, because I love the fact that yes, you are a tattoo master, but you're also a historian. You're also an author. And say if somebody wanted to just come and talk with you or even get in touch with you to learn more about their Filipino culture, can they do that without, some people are like, no, I don't want a tattoo. I just want to go learn. Would you do that too?
Oh yeah. I have a lot of resources besides my books. Mm-hmm. There's my website that you can go to. I have a lot of Q&A on there, or FAQs just for people, because we have to do, unfortunately, for Filipinos, we have to end up doing a lot of education because of that big cultural disconnect that we have. Again, that's why it's easier to tattoo Filipinos that come from Hawaii, because they at least have the Hawaiian culture as a reference point. But we have to, a lot of time when we do the talk story portion of the process before we tattoo, we end up doing a lot of education. If you're a Hawaiian, for example, and you say, oh yeah, this one design is for wakea, people understand that. They understand usually who wakea and papa are. Our people don't. So we have to go back and we have to do a lot of the oral traditions so that they have context for what is being put on their body.
I always say that sometimes we have to set our historical clock back further to know where we're going forward. Is a question I was thinking of, the genealogy wise, when you're doing tattoos, does it come from the matriarch or the patriarch side, or does it matter?
In the Philippines, we had a type of matrilineal focused culture, not matriarchy, but matrial focused or egalitarian. And again, there are multiple ethnic groups in the Philippines, so it varies place to place. But in most cultures of the Philippines, we inherited bilaterally from both parents.
Now, if so you can so what happens if somebody's multi-cultured, multi-ethnicities? Now, do you pull from each side when it comes to designing?
We can either represent one particular ethnic group, or we can represent multiple. Very similar to Hawaiian culture, the left side of the body is considered the maternal side, or the feminine side, and the right side is the masculine side or the paternal side. Unless you're left-handed, and we switch it.
Right. I like that. So again, if you're joining us, Lane, first of all, mahalo. Thank you. Maraming salamat po for joining me. I know you guys are busy and you got a lot of things going on. Again, if you're on YouTube, this is the extended version. Hit the notification button, subscribe. You got any questions, anything you want to find out from the mind of Manong Lane Wilcken, you can do it right here. So that's how we do it. This is the space where we get to share, learn, and teach culture. This is Culturized. Mahalo.